That you've invited me here. I've been to the Netherlands perhaps a dozen times in the last 30 years, giving talks, mostly giving talks, sometimes just visiting. And it's a wonderful country, very sane. Also, I think I'd be slimmer if I lived here because I ride my bicycle everywhere. And that's not so easy to do in New Jersey. So they said, you should come give a keynote. And I said, what should I give a keynote about? Because I could talk about a lot of things. And they asked around the board, and I got about 8 different suggestions. And I said, okay, well, I can do each of these, but it's not going to be very focused. And I started producing that, and this is a new talk. Whenever I do a new talk, there are several problems. The slides will be a little out of order. I can spend an arbitrary amount of time on one section. You can see there's a progress meter down here on the bottom. And in case you're wondering whether we're going to be here for hours, I do about 2 slides a minute. Is my average rate. The fastest I know is a fellow, Larry Lessig in the United States, who does 8 slides a minute with one word, and boom. You know, the patent, boom, patent needs to be fixed, boom, fixed. I don't do it quite that much. So I have a bunch of things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to randomly go on it. I'm not necessarily an expert in most of these fields, but I will touch on some thoughts I have which may be useful or entertaining to you. Please give me feedback afterwards. One of the great things about giving keynotes at a conference is you can spend the rest of the conference getting feedback on your work from people who know more than you do about something. And you probably do. So please feel free. So here is a brief outline. By the way, the slides are mostly for me. You'll know the ones that are for you. This is so I don't forget. The brain does this. The IOUT, brief comments, driving cars, stolen iPhone, threats to privacy, how can we win, and why I think we're actually going to win this in the long run. And I have a whole long talk about that. I'm just going to touch on a little bit this time. Why I think this mess is actually going to get better. And that talk is aimed at the jaded, cynical expert who's been doing this for decades. Yeah, like you. And yeah, there are a few of you in here. I think we're going to win this eventually. And I'll explain why, and maybe you can tell me if I convince you in two short things. So first we're going to start with some brief comments about net neutrality and quantum stuff and cryptocurrencies. Net neutrality depends on your definition. This is a very hot topic. Of course, people are worried that the internet security providers are going to cut flow and so on. But you know, this all gets back to the design of the internet, which was the end-to-end principle. That you'd have a dome center and smart things around the outside that could all talk to each other. That was the ideal. That's what they were aiming for. And of course, the first question I heard when I heard about, I've been beating this principle all my life. I mean, a firewall, it breaks the end-to-end principle. And so do lots of other things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the first things I thought about was in the early 90s, there were some papers that said, hey, we can do telephone calls over the internet. And I'm thinking, the internet's designed to drop packets whenever it wants to. How is this going to work? You're going to need lots of extra capacity. And who's going to pay for that? Because it's some guy in the middle. And of course, that's what this fight is all about. And I don't have any particular answers, but I have some observations. So there are lots of variations in net neutrality. It really hasn't been neutral for a long time. Asymmetric speeds. If you have an ADSL line, they're assuming that you're not a server, you're a client. That's not neutral. And in my case, I pay an extra $100 a month so that I have static IP addresses. Dynamic IP is also not neutral. It's interesting, I pay for static IPv4 addresses, I've got 5 of them. They also give me an IPv6 address, a /56, and it doesn't change, but they don't guarantee it's static. It would be really nice, I'd like to do this. So NAT is certainly not neutral. Firewalls and proxies, kind of onion networks, not neutral, specifically. Oh, you think they are? Okay, well, I'm going to this talk a little later. Well, maybe they are. I'll have to think about that. And of course, traffic shaping, which is all about this. But basically, IP allows dropped packets, and that's what neutral means. Now, I worked on internet mapping for, well, from 1998 to about 2011. I collected data. In 1995 or 6, I stopped working for Lumeta, which had done mapping, and I went to AT&T Labs, and I said, well, I'm done with mapping, enough of this. And my first week there, they said, the Federal Communications Commission wants to control how we run our network. Our message to them is, the network is really complicated. You don't know enough to tell our engineers what to do. Would you please make us an internet map so that we can put it up there and say, see, it's complicated. And so I did that sort of thing. And in fact, here is a corporate network. Actually, it's Lucid's network from 1999. And it's pretty complicated. And that's the size of a small ISP. There were about 100,000 hosts on that network. So I made those. And they actually put one of the maps up in one of the airports in Washington, D.C., so that the congressmen returning from their states would see the map as they were going into their work. So anyway, I think it's a big fist fight. It's over money. And the way to fix this is to have lots of choices. Right now, I have pretty much one choice for internet at my house, an old cable connection that goes to my house that I get 50 in and 10 out. I could do the satellite, but that doesn't work yet. But 5G is coming. They want to replace that. That will be a competitor. And there are at least 2 companies that are talking about putting fleets of low-hanging satellites to bring internet to everyone at high speed. That would be 3 choices. I believe that kind of competition will take care of this entire argument, because some will do better than others, and I'm a capitalist. I think the free market will handle that. So we'll see. Anyway, there's my first point. Whoops, no, come back here. Quantum key exchange, using the magic of physics to trade secrets. They now can do it from the ground to the satellite. It works. It might be ubiquitous. Our home routers may use this someday. I don't know. It seems to work, but it isn't a big deal. It's not end-to-end encryption, which has really been the gold standard for at least 20 years, if not more. Okay, so how about quantum computing? I am not an expert in quantum physics. I'm not sure anyone is. But I probably know more about it than I know about cryptography. And it's really hard to do. However, there are so many different ways you can access the quantum realm. There are rings of superconductors, and there are ions, and there are photons, and there are crystals that vibrate, and so on, that I am convinced that somebody is going to figure out, and actually are figuring out, how to make larger and larger groups of qubits be entangled. I think this is an engineering problem that will get solved. And we're now seeing it. IBM has announced a 50 qubit. You can log in and do a 20 qubit thing now. By the way, the language that you program in is an interesting problem. And J.H.A, the A in AWK, is thinking a lot about this. I have dinner with him every once in a while. Actually, not dinner, I have a beer with him. Another person at the beer is Jim McKee, who I believe used to hang out at NCVAX many years ago. And he's now working for Cisco and lives in New Jersey. And Intel has the Tangle Lake CPU, which is 49 qubits. It's pretty clear that lithography is going to be really helpful for doing this somehow. And 49 bits is not scary yet, but it's going to be. Actually, the most important solution is not going to be crypto breaking. It's actually solving quantum chemistry problems. We spent a lot of CPU time over the years. I remember when I was working back at Temple University in the late 70s. The chemists were sitting there trying to find the lowest energy for a molecule. And quantum calculus actually is doing the quantum mechanics things that are needed. Anyway, choose your encryption algorithms and keys carefully and talk to encrypting people about this. Cryptocurrencies. So I missed out on early Bitcoin. I looked and said, you know, I've got some money to spare. We'll talk a little bit about that later. You know, it's $300 of Bitcoin. Why don't I spend 10 grand on it? And just, you know, the worst I'm going to do is lose 10 grand. It's sort of the rate of the future. And I said that again at $1,000 and at $3,000. And by $8,000, I said, can this really go much higher? And, and you know, I'm glad I didn't. There are now hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there. I think they're very interesting. I noted yesterday that Facebook is thinking about doing its own cryptocurrency called Zuckbucks or something like that. At least with tulips you had a flower, right? And this is really interesting. The idea, the Treaty of Westphalia keeps coming up in conversations, which was from my history class in 10th grade. About how nations decided who was going to be boss of what. And cryptocurrency has really cut to the heart of that. And I think we may see some redefinition. Of course, if you have a cryptocurrency, you have a pile of expensive bits. Can you protect it? Well, experience seems to show that no, people aren't very good at protecting bits. So be careful. The real breakthrough is blockchain. There are a whole bunch of companies doing this because blockchain is a way of doing ledgers cheaply and verifiably, and I think I have a couple more words on that in another one. So let's look at coin mining for a moment. It uses vast amount of power to get a number. Look, Mom, look what my computer did today. It only cost $3,000 and stuff. It is a gold rush. Really, very much so. And in gold rushes, the people who get rich are the people who sell the supplies. Right? You want to sell the pans and all that sort of thing. The suppliers become rich. And right now, NVIDIA is a gold mining stock, which might surprise those of you who use their GPUs for other functions. So I'm going to divert briefly into something I do in some of these talks, which is to give a stock tip. NVIDIA, you know of, is using gaming graphics. They've been doing that for a while. These slides, by the way, are online right now at my site, including a high-res version of that lovely graph of the NVIDIA stock price. Of course, there's deep learning and neural nets, which is really where most of their money is going. If you want to do some deep learning, you go out and buy a giant rack filled with NVIDIA chips. And their stock is going up beautifully. And if you want to do Bitcoin mining, you can do that. It's about 7% of their revenues. So it's not a bad thing, but it's not why you buy it. The earnings growth, if you look here, you see this green line? That is the dollars per share, the earnings that the company's making. If that goes up, then this other line, the price, is going to go up. Now, if people get gloomy and disgusted, the price may come down for a little bit, and it's going to with this. This is an expensive stock. But if you look at this and say, I think that green line is going to keep doing that for 5 years, buy now and sit tight and wait. I've doubled my money in a year on this. And you can see it's been growing since about 2014. And it sure looks like it's going to continue. And I can't see any technical reason why it isn't. There are going to be competitors. It won't be quite as expensive a stock. Anyway, I have some friends who are very happy that I pointed out NVIDIA to them. And by the way, this is what I'm doing these days. What's my job? Stock picker. It turns out I bought companies like Cisco in the 90s and saved a lot of money, skipped the trips to Disneyland and saved money. And now there's enough money that I can afford a farm and I don't have to work. Of course, I didn't have to work at my last job. I said, you know, I made $50,000 in stocks today. Why am I in this building? And the answer was that I was working with people like you, really smart, interesting people that you can't pay to get to. You've got to find somehow. By the way, this stock chart is a glorious form of visualization. They do everything right. No other stock chart on the internet does this. You go to Google or Yahoo or all of those. This does everything right. It's semi-log. It's plotted proportionally. The earnings are plotted at a price-earnings ratio of 15, so you can tell an expensive stock because the distance from the price to the earnings is high. That means a high PE ratio. It means an expensive stock. And you can see there's also dividends down here. This is a brilliant visualization. You can get them from these guys, and the subscription is $1,200 a year, and for me, that's a bargain. Because I can go through and find the companies that are really growing. Most stocks are not worth owning. And yes, European stocks are in there as well, at least as ADRs for the US. So it can give you some idea. Anyway, there's something. And then, of course, blockchain, which has really hit the world. A lot of companies are out there. I actually met someone at a beekeeping conference who said, yeah, we're doing blockchain. Blockchain for beekeeping? Yeah, this is a way to audit the honey, because the big deal is if you get honey from certain places, it'll come with rice, sugar in it, or other adulterations, and you want to have a verifiable chain. It's not entirely clear to me how blockchain fixes that. I wouldn't put any money in it, but still pretty. It's all over the place, and this is a big deal because companies that do ledger stuff, it used to take 3 days, now take a few minutes, and it's verifiable and auditable, and it works out very nicely. Who knew? Internet of Things is as bad as it seems. I have considered on my network, on my home, putting up a separate Wi-Fi network, no password, and going out on eBay and buying every one of the worst devices that you can find on the internet, putting them all on that network, and then monitoring the hell out of the traffic that comes from it. Of course, the cameras are pointing at fields and bees and stuff. There's nothing important. It would be nice. It would be called The Good Place for those who have seen that TV show. The UL listing would be nice, and I think Mudge is working on this. I would like someone to test it and give a stamp of approval. I pay an extra $10. I tell my mom, well, she doesn't buy these things, but I tell people like my mom, when you go to Best Buy and get a webcam, get the one with the UL approval. You'll pay an extra $10, but they have done at least a bunch of elementary tests that you all know how to do. The kernel isn't 5 years old. It has a way to upgrade. You know, it doesn't have open ports like Telnet, that sort of thing. There might be levels up to something really superb. But, looks like there's a dang, I've been doing this for a long time. Okay, so, oh, I see, I have been doing this for a long time. So I thought, see, I had my list of stuff to give you a talk about, and about sometime yesterday morning I said, this is too preachy and not enough fun. So I spent some time making the talk more fun yesterday, and one of them is the Internet of Unix Things, because this is, after all, a Unix conference. It goes back to 1982? I mean, I think that's right. You know, the Netherlands has been on the internet for a long time, not only NCBACs. I used to study Dijkstra, you know, the grumpy Dutchman. And if you read his writings, he's grumpy, but for good reason. So I thought maybe I'd talk, I worked in the Unix room at Bell Labs with all those famous people who made Unix for about 12 years. And one of the things the Unix room had was one of the very first text-to-speech devices, and this was a piece of hardware made around 1973 or something like that. It was very, very early. It was so early that Disney asked for one for Epcot Center, and they said, sure, and Disney said, but we don't want it to say bad words. So Doug McElroy said, give me a list of the bad words. And he got a list of officially bad words from Disney. And one of his regrets is he lost the list. Anyway, it's a great story. But this was in the room when I arrived in 1987, just before my trip to Switzerland, and it would announce things at the end of the day. And it was mostly astronomical stuff from a program Ken Thompson wrote called Astro. Astro minus K says, give me a list of what's happening in the sky for the next day. Minus K means use the kitchen clock, not GMT. And I have run that through a shell script called AstroTrim that makes it speakable. And this is what happened yesterday. Monday, new moon, sunsets, twilight, Venus, Mars, comet. I'm not sure what comet it is. Occultations and so on are in there. Ken wrote a program to compute all this stuff. If you want it, it's in the Plan 9 for Unix tools. You go get that and type install, and after 20 minutes, you've got it all. And that's there. And it even announced Sheep of the Day, which I'm not going to describe here, but if you ask me afterwards, I'll tell you the story, which is slightly inappropriate. The Unix room was never an appropriate place. It was a tough environment. And anyway, so I took this program. This runs at my house. So I'll get to this. We're now at a farm. We've been there for 3 years. Before that, we were 25 years in a nice house in the suburbs. And I took a computer with a sound port and plugged it into the intercom of the house, the auxiliary input. So the computer could talk to the house. Okay, easy enough to do. So it'd be networked, it'd have an audio port. I use Festival for text-to-speech, and an audio player. And in the new house, the previous owners had put in speakers in 4 rooms, and they all came to one place. So I went out and bought 4 speakers, daisy-chained them together, took the audio output from this USB device, which plugs into a free BSD box, and now I can talk to the house. And of course, what do? Well, cron jobs, of course. The first one, at 1 minute before noon, sleeps for 49 seconds. That's a very important amount of time. And then plays Big Ben. Now it turns out Big Ben does the ding, 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 and then the gong. And I used to not have the sleep, but then I was in London one day and said, wait, it starts 20 seconds before. Actually, That'd be 11 seconds before, so I have to do this to make it right. So in my house at noon, we get Big Ben chiming through the walls. And that's kind of cool. We also have a grandfather clock running top of the hour at the hours when I'm awake. Okay, and of course NTP, so this is within half a second of the right time. Now top of the hour, actually, a minute before the hour, I have a job called WTFIW, what is wrong? And it goes out and checks the whole network. Am I connected? Is the barn hooked up and all that stuff? And if there's something wrong, the chime changes. Instead of a ding, it goes chime. And then this is a little subtle feedback that something's wrong with the house. Turns out that's just the right amount. You want to know the top of the hour, but you don't want to know a lot of details. And of course, the good morning, that's Ken's thing. The good morning pipe to say. Very handy, we have trash, announced 3 times, but our trash pickup every other week is recycling as well as trash. And I can't keep track of that. So I have a little thing that takes a number of seconds since 1970 and divides it down to, is this an even week or an odd week? And one of those is a trash week. So this reminds us of whether there's trash today or trash and recycling today. Very handy. Oh crap, it's trash day. And update oil and oil movie. When I moved into the house, oh, I'm not going to get through anywhere near all my slides. When I moved into the house, I ordered oil. It's got oil heat. I don't like it, but I'm in the middle of nowhere, sort of. And they'd start delivering oil, which is really expensive. And one day I looked, and he was delivering oil that was $1.90 a gallon. And I said, you know, the current price online is like $1.45 a gallon. And I'm buying 400 gallons. I'm paying this guy an extra couple $100. I said, why is this so expensive? And he said, oh, you have the premium version. They didn't tell me about that. What happens to the premium version? Well, if your furnace breaks, we'll fix it, and we figure out when to bring your oil. I said, so if I call you to get oil, I'll get the cheap price? Yes. But then I have to, every once in a while, go down into the basement with the spiders and stuff and look at the gauge. So what I did was I took a little Raspberry Pi, and a little video camera, and a little USB light, and hooked it up like this. And I have a little job that runs from my program that goes and grabs that image every hour. Now, if you grab that image every hour, now I can tell this was from yesterday, so I'm good. But if you're grabbing the image all the time, yes, am I doing okay?
2 seconds blinken. Dutch. Staat in de parkeergarage een Jaguar 76 TVL1 die graag helemaal leeg wil zijn. Ramen, deuren staan open, niet op slot. Als dat van een van ons is, ik graag even je auto weer gaan afsluiten.
Okay. It would be all Greek to me, but I don't know Greek either. Okay, so if you're getting a picture every hour, you might as well. Oh, do I have to hit the space bar or click? There we go. Make a movie of it. This is my oil consumption starting from last September. And you can see October, we got a fill. November was cold. December is cold. It gets pretty cold there. And January was cold. Sometimes the light was left on by the cleaners. February, it's warming up. And there we go. March is getting warmer. April's much warmer. Someone left the light on for a day. And that's where it was. So anyway, that's something you can do. That's an Internet of Unix things. Of course, this means that your Saturday chores include system administration, which you're probably doing during the week as well. So you better like system administration because some assembly is required. And of course, I'm retired and I'm still doing system administration. So let's look at some more. Here are the stocks. This is when the stock market opens and closes. And I update the stock web. I have a secret website that I go to that shows my current portfolio. And something that decides whether the market's open or closed for the day, and when. And finally, the last one, the International Space Station goes overhead, and we have iridium flares. I don't know if you've ever seen these. This goes through to heavensabove.com, scrapes the page, has done so for 20 years, and finds at my location, when I'm awake, if it's far enough up above the horizon, run a cron job that tells me that the space station's passing overhead. And it sort of changes your view of life to sort of, you hear it's passing overhead, you go outside, it's calm and quiet, and you know, you see them going by. We've had parties where everyone is emptied out onto the outside to watch the space station go overhead, or watch an iridium flare. I should add that there should be an is cloudy command in there. I have been trying to do is cloudy now for 20 years, and it's hard. You would think you check air stuff or weather things. All I want to know is the sky clear or not, where I am now. And I have tried about 5 different ways of doing it, and none of them have been satisfying. I might actually have to put in an infrared sensor that looks up and just tells me. But that's sort of too much. So I have a digital farm. Been doing this for 25 years, a lot of X10 stuff. Oh, Christmas lights. You take LED Christmas lights, 1 string of each color, hook them up to the dimmers on X10, and make the Christmas lights flash in a non-tacky manner. We're not talking those Italian houses in North Jersey with all the lights flashing and that sort of stuff. What it does is it takes 1 color and starts to dim it very slowly and bring up another color. And then sit there for 5 minutes with a different color. At our old house, people would say, did you change the lights on your tree? Because they passed one day and it was red, and the next day it was blue and yellow. I had a neighbor who would show this to his friends, and he gave me a call and said, make it change faster. There are lots of silly ideas for Internet of Things. I have not figured out yet why I would want any sort of network or thing in my refrigerator. Yeah, I know when I'm out of cottage cheese. I don't need some sensor in there. I did have something a week ago. The freezer door was ajar a little bit, and things are just starting to melt, and that would have been nice. But you know, to have that feature, you need a computer, power, a sensor. It's not a bad idea, but that's really all I need for that. A lot of this other stuff, the dishwasher doesn't need it, that sort of stuff. Bad idea, I had my house machine announced when it was rebooted. That only had to happen once at 3 a.m. for me to say, no, you're not doing that. Another one, I put a motion sensor inside the mailbox. So when the mailman opened it, it would say, "You got mail!" And if my wife was home alone in a nice quiet house and suddenly the house said, "You've got mail," it scared the hell out of her. So I changed it to, "Excuse me, the mailbox is open." And a whole other talk is beehive scales. I live on a farm and we have approximately 250,000 bees now. And that's about 25, 28 hives. My wife takes care of all of them. Some of you may meet her, she's around. I spin the honey and also do some of the data collection. We have weight scales under some of the hives, so you can see how heavy the hive is through the day. You can see the bees leaving, coming back, you can see the honey building up. If half the hive decides to leave, which sometimes they do, you can see that, which raises an interesting problem. This is an Internet of Things that's out in the fields, so far from power, and sometimes far from cell service. How do you do Internet of Things there? The solar solutions are not very good. And I've tried a bunch of different ones. I'd love to have a low power mode for Arduino that basically says, wake up, do this data gathering from this low power Bluetooth for a minute, then shut yourself off for an hour. No power. If I can do that, that's an energy budget I can handle nicely with a solar cell. And then, yes,
did you try Proto Scatter?
I am energy constrained.
Okay.
And yeah, certainly that's an idea. Or meteors, especially if you're in Alaska. There are probably ham solutions that can happen, but remember, I'm just trying to run a Raspberry Pi that wakes up, grabs some data from Bluetooth and goes to sleep, and every hour sends about 2 UDP packets. That's about what I need. And it turns out 2G networks are perfect for this, because they're slow, no one cares about them, and they're cheap. It can be $1 a month, something like that, for a megabyte a month, which is plenty for Hive data. But this is a problem I've wrestled with. I've even tried taking an old 4S, an iPhone 4S, and using it as a machine. The problem is that when it goes into background mode, there are very strict Apple restrictions on what it can do, and they're just a little stricter than I can handle. Otherwise, it has everything I need. Cell access, apps. I write in J.H.A. Okay, so the farm looks like this. We're between a train line and a river, and this is all our lowland. It's tick infested. I have Lyme disease again. Last night, Debbie took me to the Dutch medical center where I got some doxycycline. So I'm standing before you sick at the moment, though it doesn't seem to be so bad. Our house is mostly up there, and it looks like this. And it's a very nice place, and we can afford it because we saved our money and invested in stocks for 40 years. And now we can afford this. And it works okay. There are the bees over on the right, and a nice swimming pool. There are about half a dozen places that are a really great place to sit and watch the birds and read papers. And we have Wi-Fi and all that. So if you don't want to be a farmer, you can just sit and enjoy the pool. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm playing with Melissa Pollinology, which is analysis of pollen in honey to find out where the nectar came from that the bees made the honey from. It turns out honeys taste different. We get 4 different nectar flows on our farm a year, and they taste different. One lady said that the stuff we gave her from last fall said they taste like autumn, which sounds like a great marketing statement. So I got me a microscope, like the one I used to use 50 years ago in school, and I've been staining and testing microscopes. And I've learned these little bubbles here probably mean I'm overheating the pollen a little bit. Anyway, of course, all of this predates Alexa. And I have Alexa, we have Alexa all around. We have various thermostats. We have a Samsung smart TV and smart things. By the way, I think Samsung's TVs are glorious. They take great images, but their software is stupid. And I think calling it a smart TV was a big mistake because it's really lousy interface. I like the LG interface better. And then, I mean, they both have gorgeous images. And the real question I have is, now that I have all these, how do I talk to them from my FreeBSD system? Because I'd love to have Alexa do these announcements and fold into my old Unix things. I haven't figured that out yet. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time on it. I know there are a couple of different ways of doing this. And I'd like it not to involve something that's a remote server. I'd like it to be local, which is not something that's usually commercial. So here we are, a third of the way through to self-driving cars. And I have a half an hour, I guess, something like that. When do you want me to stop? You know? Half hour, okay, we'll speed up a little bit. 100 years ago, cars looked like this. And this was a great one, had electric start. Before that, it was a crank start. And if you used your right hand and it backfired, it would break your arm. How is that different than don't click on an attachment in email? Okay, maybe less painful, but maybe not if you just lost your machine. The road to self-driving cars, oh, I did it this way. So there were lots of things. The throttle and mixture controls became automatic. Automatic choke. There are people here who don't know what the choke is, I suspect. You young ones, come on, sorry. Turn signal shut off, you know, you go around the corner and it goes click. That was an innovation. These are all things towards a car that's more driving itself. Automatic transmission. In the United States, there are so few people who drive stick shifts now that when someone wants to carjack a car and they sit in the car, they often say, oh, it's a stick shift, and run away. All the cars that I can own that have stick shifts have stick. We love stick. Seatbelts were new. I remember before seatbelts came, my mother used to put me in the dangerous front seat and hold her arm out when she was coming to a break. And she'd do that even after we had a seatbelt. Now this is something only some of you old folks might know. And by the way, those were 2-point seatbelt, not 3-point. Intermittent wipers, what a great invention. Cruise control, I love that. Auto headlights, some of my current ones. Automatic rear view dimming, this is all stuff that's helping drive the car, but you're still driving. We're slowly approaching like a calculus limit towards a car that drives itself. But I think these steps are actually the way to go. ABS, we used to be told to pump our foot on the brake so it wouldn't lock the wheels. Now the car does that. And of course it doesn't brake faster, but it lets you steer while you're braking. Navigation systems, we used to have maps. ESO used to have great maps. Now you just type it in. And now, in fact, this thing buzzes and says turn right. It's great. Automatic parking, come on people, how hard is parking? Cruise control, radar following, that's pretty cool actually. Lane detectors, auto braking, And, Tesla has that. You're about to hit something. I'm going to hit the brakes for you. Yeah. And these are life-saving things. Blind spot monitors. There was another one I remembered this morning, but it's now escaped me, so I'd have to put it on this notes print here. Okay, so the car that my wife and I got because we could afford it because we bought the right stocks, one of our cars is a Tesla. Now this is a Model S. It is before they added all the fancy auto parking and self-driving stuff. That's okay. I've been across the country twice with it. It's sort of fun. It's like going 20 years in the future, buying a car and bringing it back, and all it does is cost 50 grand extra. And driving the car it's a golf cart with leather seats. It's very nice. We drive it around. It's lovely. So I recently had a collision in this. My first collision since the Reagan administration. And I'm going to tell you a little about this collision because it makes a point. Let's see how I did this. I was driving across a bridge at speed limit, maybe 50 kilometers an hour, and there was an exit ramp, and someone was parked there, and they went. And there was enough room. It was tight, but they went. Okay, fine, and they turned. The lady behind them said, "Oh, he's going, I'll go too." There wasn't time for her. So suddenly, she's in my lane, and I'm going to hit her. There's just no question about it. Now, you get to the question, when I first learned to drive, my driving instructor, we were going down a little street and the dog ran out, and I slammed on the brakes. I was brand new at this. It's just screeching. And he said, "No, you should have swerved around it. To brake or to swerve is one of the things you learn when you're driving." And in fact, with the latest Uber problem, it chose incorrectly. So let's look. I had to explain so I'm sitting here thinking, if she stops, I can swerve around the front of the car. No collision. However, she already started. She's not reliable. If I keep going and she keeps going, I'm going to hit her in the front. I might kill her. I'm braking. It's probably not that fast, but it's going to be right on the driver's side. On the other hand, if she keeps going, I might be able to swerve around the back. She stopped. So I collided on the back, and that was about $6,000 damage to a Tesla. You don't buy a Tesla if you don't have extra money. Everything is expensive about it after you buy it. But I had to explain this to my insurance agent. It was sort of dumping the log. This was my thinking. We didn't have a police come in here. Swerve or brake. Do we want self-driving cars to do the same thing? Do we want to see their thinking? You had an accident. What happened? What were you thinking? So of course you need some drive logging. You'd like to have, we're going to have this in these cars, 360-degree video, because this is cheap. We already see some trucks that have this in the States. This is going to, that was the other improvement, rear view cameras, which used to be too expensive. GPS data, exact time, black box information, just like a crash in an aircraft, speed, acceleration, braking, communications, were you using the cell phone, what's going on here, with other vehicles, is it talking to the other vehicle? I'm about to hit you, you should do something about that. That's not unreasonable. Communications with the manufacturer, what does it do? Because Teslas are connected to the factory by a VPN. Cockpit comments. Do we want to hear someone's last words? The "oh shit." Which, by the way, is one of the two most common things that airline pilots say just before they hit the mountain. Programmers need logs. If you're going to program this, and I'm guessing some of you may be involved in this now or sometime soon, you're going to want logs to see what's going on. You needed it for debugging. Now you want to see it on the road. And is this public data? Do we use it for AI training? Do we need an ISO standard for formatting content? And I'm going to argue that we do. So who owns this data? Well, it's my car, damn it. The police, do they own the data? How about the manufacturer? Can other drivers look at the data? What about the feds, the government reinvestigating it? Does the public have a right to this? Open source to all the crash data. Open source, there was a whole slide in here about someone who analyzed parking tickets in New York City and found things like the place that the most invalid parking tickets were given. Turns out it's a legal spot that got tickets all the time, and they managed to get that changed. And they found that by analyzing public data. This is good. This is The reasoning of the collision might be complex or proprietary. I'm sorry, we spent a jillion man months figuring out how this car driving is going to work. We're not going to tell you our logic. Is that okay? And of course, the other thing is AI. You can train it, and it'll give you a solution, and you don't know how it knew the answer. You say, is this a cow or a horse? And it's a horse. How do you know? Well, that's complicated. It's a whole bunch of weights in this giant neural network. Now, you can train these things to do that. What's important? What was important for you to tell me it was a horse and do that? So I think the historical approach is probably most palatable to people for self-driving cars. Elon Musk says that self-driving cars are safer, and therefore it's immoral not to deploy it immediately. And he has a point, but I don't think people are going to do that. I think they'll be safer than the average driver. They'll have different errors, and that's going to piss people off. There are people who are afraid to fly because they're not in control of the airplane. Those people are not going to like self-driving cars either, for exactly the same reason. And it isn't just the trolley problem, and different societies are going to have different answers. I have been a passenger in a car driven in Beijing. They don't drive the way I do. In fact, I learned not to look out the front of the car. I didn't want to know. I had to sort of accept on faith that we weren't going to hit people, and we never did. So they may have different software. And that's maybe a good thing. So I suspect, here I'm speculating, that cars may have a manual mode for remote areas. You'll still be driving it. But when you get towards a city or a highway, you're going to enter the grid. And your computer is going to join this sort of internet of cars, and you have to take your hand off the wheel. In fact, it may disengage, or maybe you get hit with manslaughter if it doesn't work. It's going to run diagnostics and make sure the car is working, and so on. Strict penalties. It'll have cameras and sensors and data, and auto performance inspection. You'll have a real-time, how are your brakes working today? Well, you're down to 15.3%. It'll allow safer travel, because if a computer is driving all the cars, you don't need that giant space in case the guy in front of you slams on the brake. You can go like this. That gives you more highway capacity. Also, maybe it's okay to go 90 miles an hour. Or even better, 150 kilometers per hour. We can all live in Germany. And I'll tell you, I've driven on the Autobahn and then gone back to the States. There is no reason why our highways couldn't do those speeds. They're safe enough, but we don't have those same laws. The grid will allow that. Also, if you're putting cars together, you get more trailing, you get more wind resistance. So I think that's going to happen. And the interesting thing is that if you drive now, you have to pass a driver's test. It is clear to me that self-driving automobile software is going to have to pass a driver's test. Makes sense, right? And what you can do, if you have a standard input, all the cameras and all the stuff that goes into a sensor, software, and an ISO standard set of controls, turn right, turn left, brake, and so on, you can put a million different situations on the input, put the proposed software in here, and see what the result is. Your computer might have to pass a driver's test every night as they update the information with stuff. Also, you might be buying this. Your insurance company may decide whose software you buy. Does it come from the government? Does it come from Apple or Tesla? Is there an open source drivers thing that comes from the University of Minnesota? Because somehow they're really good at this, and you can choose which one you wanted? Does your insurance company have say in this? You know, for someone who is a real free marketer, you shouldn't get your license from the government. You should get it from the insurance company who has to stand behind you. Anyway, that might be a way to go. But all this requires standardized inputs. I suspect we'll see that. Of course, some of these would be proprietary. Well, you just put this box in here and feed the input in and out, and this is what we've got. Well, you passed 1.5 million different situations. You can go on the road. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea, actually. We'll see if that happens. Okay, so I have 20 minutes left, and I'm not halfway through. That's okay. We're having fun, right? About 10 years ago, my iPhone was stolen. By stolen, I mean I left it in a movie theater and forgot it and left. And the usher picked it up and kept it. To quote Liam Neeson, I have a specific set of skills needed to recover a stolen iPhone. this poor guy had no idea what he was doing. I had, among other things, my email running on a Hillary-compatible mailer. For those of you who follow American stuff, I've been running Hillary kinds of emailers since 1987 at Bell Labs. So it was checking in on my machine using IMAPs and SMTP. And we also had an app we were working on, something called Air Graffiti, where you could sort of write imaginary things in the air, and you come with your app and look around, and people could leave the graffiti there. And the first thing Air Graffiti did was get your location. And the guy looked at this and said, I wonder what that is, and tapped it. So we knew where he lived. And that suggests that maybe you want an app with an attractive icon that attracts a tap if it gets stolen. And you could decide what that icon might be. In fact, you can't change it on an app. Huh? It could be a naughty picture. It could, you could think of, you could have several of them all that do the same thing. Don't touch this, or secret, or there's all sorts of stuff you could do. There were a bunch of laws that were broken. It was certainly misdemeanor theft. But then the second day he had it, he read and deleted my email, and that turns out to be a federal crime in the United States. So how do I track it down? Well, I got the GPS data from Air Graffiti. There was a bunch of IP addresses from mail. And now today's quiz. Can you count how many radios are in an iPhone? GPRS, 2G, I'm counting 2G and 3G as separate. 4G, LTE, which is sort of 4G. The new 5G is going to be in there. Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. And I was working for a phone company at the time. We talked to most of those, including the GPS, which means potentially we could find all this, because AGPS uses the cell tower data. But what was most helpful was my logs from Dovecote with all those IP addresses. By the way, these IP addresses, which scanned a whole bunch of different Class A networks, were all coming from the same house. This guy really had dynamic IP address. In the old days, dynamic IP addresses would change every 5 months or something like that, at least on our stuff. We were getting different Class A's in different times of the day. Okay? This guy basically said, okay, I have a web browser, and started browsing with it. At what time of day does he turn it on and browse it? Well, I had the logs. I did this with Burford back in my book. And there's some interesting things here. Seems like he sleeps between about 6 a.m. and noon. And he does a bunch of stuff, but he also does browsing in the middle of the night. It turns out this was when he had his part-time job at the movie theater. But we knew where it was. We knew it was one of these two houses. And so we drove by the house. We knew the MAC address of the phone, and we found it. We did this with the police, who were learning new high-tech crime stuff. Knocked on the door, said, we're looking for an iPhone, not this big deal. Oh yeah, it's right here. Yeah, you're coming with us. Ended up, he got charged. Our technology was new. The court accepted it and wasn't challenged by the defense, which makes it case law now, though I don't know if anyone knows it. He had 1 year probation, and then I got a letter from the prosecutor. New Jersey has a victim fund for people who have been victimized by this. Now, I should tell you that this was stolen about 2 weeks before a new iPhone was announced. I had just about finished my 2-year contract, and I knew that I wasn't getting this phone back for months. So like 2 days after it was stolen, I went to the Apple store and bought a new phone. So this was some cost. But the prosecutor said, how much did this cost you? And I said, oh God. Turns out this guy was a Mexican immigrant. Probably as poor as dirt. And I'm not trying to make it, I wanted to hurt a little, but I'm not trying to make money on this guy. And I gave a whole explanation of, I don't need the money, it should hurt a little. It either cost me a bunch of money because I was out of my contract and have to get a new contract, or it cost this much because this is the amortized. Anyway, it got complicated. And I ended up getting 92 bucks, something like that. Okay, so there we go. I have a whole section here on threats to privacy, and about 12 minutes left. So I'm going to cruise pretty quickly through this stuff. It turns out I heard a talk by Ed Felton just a week ago. You should invite him if you want to know about privacy. He's deep in it. In fact, he's The president wants to appoint him to a privacy position in the administration. Yeah, he's a good guy to have there for that. So there are lots of threats to privacy. Backdoors, intentional, you know all this. This is some of the stuff I deleted. Network leaks are a problem. One could start a whole company looking for leaks in the intranets. You met it. It turns out South Korea, just a year ago, announced that they had lost a whole bunch of military secrets because one of their computers was connected unknown to the outside. That's a leak. We could have helped them with that. You know, it's actually really easy. You send packets with spoofed return addresses, and if they arrive on the outside, you know it's going through a leak. Who can keep things secure? Nobody. RSA, who's paid for this? 500 million passwords are available. I just downloaded them yesterday. The US government, I had clearance at one point. All that data is in China. NSA has Snowden. What happened to bulkheads in security? He seems to have access to everything. Though I should point out while I'm on that, if you had hired me for the NSA in 1999 to do this sort of work, the first thing I would have said was, let's find out how to hack SMM mode in Intel chips. Because that's underneath that sort of level -1. And about half of Snowden's hacks are, step 1, get into SMM mode. Step 2, bad stuff. Why is there an SMM mode? Well, I actually know the guys who designed the chip. They said, we need it for maintenance. It's like having a boat with an optional hole in the bottom. Stuxnet, they're major corporate hacks. You've heard all of these. Who uses the data? Research. Okay, this is one of my points. Look, we're going to get research. I'll get to that in a moment. I think the answer is that privacy is gone. We can try our stuff. I'm looking forward. The US isn't very good at this. Europe, maybe it's going to be better, but I don't think it's going to work. My personal solution is I try to live an open life. I have some secrets, but they're mostly other people's secrets, not mine. Now that's not a very satisfactory answer, but that's what I'm doing right now. It's what I've been doing for a long time. For one thing, there's the question, even if your crypto works, there's the metadata. If you go back and read the wonderful stories about Bletchley Park and the breaking of the Enigma, all that's been declassified, except there was a fellow there, a commander, who kept track of all of the sources and destinations of the things, the traffic analysis. There is a pretty clear hole in the public information about traffic analysis from World War II that I think is still relevant. It is clearly very powerful. Who talks to whom? You can learn almost everything about it. Disk space is cheap. Why would you throw away data? You can go down to a store and get a couple terabytes cheap. Anonymization does not work. Okay? The statisticians, which is a great job to be in, can pull this data out of everything. And we've seen it from all sorts of packet dumps and AOL and social networks. It doesn't work. So one proposal, and the reason I jumped through this to get up here, is an idea I've had for a certified data wrangler. You know, there are people who use plutonium every day. Okay? Dangerous stuff. Now, plutonium's not data. Engineers have to stand under the bridge they design when the first load goes across. I think we could use a certified data wrangler. The data that we get, personal data, medical data, is hugely useful. We can save lives, live longer, run it on drug trials and stuff, but the data is toxic. And a certified data wrangler would be a very highly paid engineer who would have a hole in the network where data comes in and doesn't come out, where all the secrets would go in, and he would be responsible for data spills. And by responsible, I mean 10-year prison term. Okay, this sort of responsibility for data focuses the security answers very thoroughly. When DocMaster was first put online at NSA, they said, boss, we want to put up a web server here at NSA. Okay, if it's ever hacked, you two are fired. This sort of focus means you don't have it, well, Windows is easy. No, you're going to get it as right as you can. And the data wrangler needs to do that. Well, what if they kidnap his family? I want the penalties to be maybe you lose them. I don't know. You have to figure it out. But these are people who you could say, I want you to run this data on all the blood typing information we have on 20 million people, and you know this is the output, and it'll be useful, and do that sort of stuff. So someone who's allowed to touch the data. Anyway, can we win? Well, I was going to talk a little bit about this issue. The Fourth Amendment, you know, America was initialized with fixing some bugs in the British King's system. And this was one of them, was you got to be secure in your person's houses and papers and effects. Does that mean your iPhone too? What if your iPhone data is not in your box? We have to answer this question better. I would say that yes, my iPhone is part of my effects and the data in it, but that's an issue. But what about the part where a judge says that the guys who are running this get to have access to it? You get into the whole crypto wars question. They say, well, put in a backdoor. The problem is people who don't want backdoors have not been able to make the software secure enough to not have a virtual backdoor in it. Apple has been trying for years, and there are still people who can break into Apple's stuff, though it's getting harder. Of course, the law enforcement folks, and these are friends of mine, I've helped them for many years, talk about going dark. We've got kid pornographer here, and we can't open this because it's encrypted. It's going dark. Well, they usually get them another way. There are lots of different ways around it. There's also, you know, I have friends at the NSA and the CIA, and they seem to be honest, upstanding people. Maybe you don't trust them, but I'm inclined to, having had a few root beers with them and stuff. But they can't seem to keep secrets. And then there's stuff like Spectre and Meltdown and SMM and Tempest. Tempest is the secret rules for how you seal off a computer room so data doesn't leak out. And the US and NATO have rules for this. And we sort of know about the sort of things that happen with this, but we've sort of forgotten this. With cloud computing, we have many efficiencies, and it's worth it if you're transcoding Netflix movies. But if you have other stuff that's really important, those CPUs have the opposite of Tempest. Not only are you not behind the screen in a different room, you're in the same CPU, maybe using the same cache. And this is a lost lesson, I think. I don't think Dijkstra would approve. And all these attacks are the sort of things that Tempest thought about 30 years ago. The poacher attacks, timing data, you should never get close enough to be able to run these. Rowhammer, when hardware doesn't work, you want to do it. Key rat, cache recovery, all these clever hacks. So the hardware is a problem, and I would like to see simple hardware. We have a Raspberry Pi over there, it costs $35 or something like that. We don't need 3.5 gigahertz CPUs for most of us. In fact, this brand new MacBook Pro, well, it's a little older than brand new, has something like a 1.6 gigahertz CPU. It's slower. It's half the speed. It uses less power. It doesn't need to be fast because it has a semi-non-spinning disk in it. If we can slow down, we can throw away fancy pants stuff like predictive execution, which is what one of these things had problems with. This fancy hardware stuff that these guys did that Cray only dreamed of in the 1960s. We can get rid of virtual memory. It's got a gigabyte. How much do you need? You know, and if you need more CPU power, put in an MPEG processor or a crypto processor, something like that. What else? I don't think we need shared libraries anymore. They came in with X. The X Windows system had such a vast thing, we had to do that. I'd like to see our kernels much simpler. Virtual memory, do we need paging? How about segments? Wouldn't that be good enough? Shared text? You know, this is shades of the early days. Minix was not a bad start. Andrew made things pretty darn simple. I like that. And in fact, Intel put them in their chip. Okay, that was great. A much smaller kernel for VM hosting. Linux, the DOM 0 is what's at the base of this thing. This is our small, trusted piece of software. I'd like to see robust sandboxes. You notice we used to call sandboxes operating systems, right? And the job was to keep people from out of it. Okay, and trusted path. Okay, so as Dijkstra said, simplicity is a prerequisite for reliability. I'm talking to you, System D. There are a whole bunch of simple files like cron tabs that are now directories and programs. These are people trying, resolveconf.conf. Oh, God, help me. Just let me edit a file. I'll tell you what I want it to be. And how do I shut this sucker off? I'm getting rid of all my Raspberry Pis and going back to virtual machines with FreeBSD. And then cat-minus me, that's a whole other talk. So it's very early in the game, and I think we're going to win this. Here, for example, was a Ford Model T from 100 years ago. Do you recognize what the pedals do? No, of course not. The middle pedal is the reverse pedal. The one on the left changes from low to high gear, and the one on the right is the brake. Okay? User interfaces are really important for security, so you know how to operate the thing. And we're still early in the computer world. The tappy squeezy thing that you guys are doing out here right now, that's 10 years old. This is early. We're going to get better. We're going to learn this stuff. 20 years ago, I was afraid we were going to be doing Microsoft drop-down menus. That's not happening. I am so delighted. We're not even trying viruses. Running a virus checker is like running the background check on a bunch of hobos living in your bathroom. They shouldn't be there in the first place. Why are people allowed to execute software on my machine? Why do I need to scramble my kernel and put blockers on my stack? They shouldn't be able to get out. This is a problem grown-ups should not have to worry about. All right, and Equifax. Update your Apache web service, come on. So there's virus checkers, legacy problems. Here's a message from a friend of mine. See the greater than sign? I got this email in the last year. Some people in here know why that's there. I'm not going to go into it now. It's really, really legacy. And of course, legacy stays our hand all the time. We have successes. The Macintosh did a rewrite. iOS is a rewrite of that. They said apps can't talk to each other except when you tell it to. Good idea. That worked a lot better. So we have better tools. Formal methods are much better than they used to be. Here are some of the people who do it. Software layers, prove things correct, make sandboxes rock solid. See, we're going through these pretty quickly. Special purpose systems, ready? There are special purpose systems. Well, you can look at these. I think this went pretty well. And bulkheads and distrust. You know, when we were examining companies from Lumeta, we had many companies, there was a German company that had 5,000 firewalls. And each firewall had more than 5,000 rules. I'm not sure why they didn't just put in wires. How the hell do you audit that? And we've had other people who said they didn't think you were checking. There you go, that's good enough. I worked out well. Thank you for your attention. And I have 1 minute for questions, or all day, if you want to. Is there someone who has a really pressing question? Yes, sir.
You were talking about self-driving cars.
Yes.
Don't you think there is a new Dieselgate coming?
A new what coming?
Dieselgate.
Dieselgate. Yes, there might be, except with Dieselgate, you were just polluting a little bit. With this, it's going to be very obvious. And we're going to have the flight recorder information from these things because I think laws will be passed to require that. I mean, we want to know what your cars are doing when they do this stuff. And I think society actually has a valid interest in knowing that information. And if they set it up the way I want it to, we'll be able to have a test bed for it. Okay, one more? Nope, that's it. Thank you.